I'm just going to introduce you. What do you want to do? All right, I've mentioned the next panel discussion is around climate change investment opportunities, and you'll be in the very capable hands of Tony Tu here. Tony is founder and CEO of Renewables in Africa. He's also an author, a broadcaster, and a multi-award winner in impact leadership, and was nominated as one of the top 50 influential Africans in the Afro-Caribbean leaders, sorry, in Africa and Afro-Caribbean leaders in the UK in 2018. Tony, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, excellent. So first of all, good afternoon, everybody. So I know that we're almost going towards the end of the conference, but stick with us. I promise you, it's going to be interesting, right? I can see, as I'm saying that, somebody's leaving, but... okay, so the past session have been all very interesting, right? And there's definitely a link with what we're going to talk about today. Because one thing that we've learned, and that we know already, was that Africa only produced 3 to 4% of global emission. Everybody knows that. But just to give a little bit of perspective, we also know that Africa tends to be the continent that is one of the most affected. But just to give some context around that, because sometimes we just say that without really actually understanding what it means. I don't know if you've been following the news recently in Nigeria, so over the weekend, where we had some flooding events, right? Some deadly flooding events. That was in the southeast state of Anambra, where we had, I think, over 70 people that actually, unfortunately, died. And then we also have almost 500,000 of people that were displaced. And Nigeria, per se, was actually very affected this year, because it's not just that state of Anambra. You have another state, which is Kogi, which also was very much affected. If you're looking at what happened during the year, right, so I think it's last year, we had about 300 people, 300 casualties, and more than 500,000 that were actually affected. Yeah, and those two states happen to be close to two main rivers, Niger and Benue, right? So I just wanted to give some kind of perspective. So when we talk about the impact of climate change, this is what we're talking about here, and that's how serious it can be. Yeah, so normally I don't like to start my panel by talking about something a little bit somber, but I thought it's important to give some perspective so that we can understand that. So there is another thing that we talked about as well, so in previous panel, which is the fact that if you're looking at what is needed to actually reach energy transitions, you know, however you want to call it. So we're talking about the NDCs, which is what every countries have submitted, national determined contribution, right? So I think it was the lady before from, I think, AFDB, she mentioned about 2.8 trillion, was it correct? Yeah, 2.8 trillion, and just 10% of that was what every African state is actually suggesting they're going to contribute altogether. It was about 300 billion, that's what they say. So, which means that 90% of it should come from the private sector. That's what it's saying. But now, what is the reality it's telling us? It's telling us that, again, from that slide, because I was just watching very carefully, it was very interesting. We saw from that slide that only 5% of the current financing, climate finance, goes into Africa, and that was 30 billion. So you can see the huge gap that is there, right? So let me just show a hand. So who in the room is an investor? Let me see. Okay, there's quite a few. Okay, excellent. So who is thinking that investment is necessary and important and should happen now? Almost everybody here. Okay, excellent. So that's what we're going to talk about today, right? We're going to talk about climate change investment opportunities. So the good thing is, I did not come on my own, right? I have here a panel with me. So anything I'm saying, hopefully they can back me up. So I'm just going to let them introduce themselves. So we're going to run through some questions, but I want every one of you to participate, please. I would appreciate that. I know it's a little bit late, but let's still do some work. Because you're here, you're actually using your time. Let's make sure that you can get out of it with something you've learned. Is it a deal? It's a deal. Excellent, good. So I'll start with you, Michelle. So if you want to briefly introduce yourself.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle Osorio. I'm with Kawisafi Ventures. We're a fund manager investing in growth stage companies in distributed renewable energy and climate solutions. in sub-Saharan Africa.
Excellent, Michelle. We're just going to go around. Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for the high-energy introduction, Tony. Much appreciated. Yep, I'm Philip Skinner. I am the Managing Director of the Global Execution Team at Garanco. Garanco is one of the private infrastructure development group of companies focusing on infrastructure investment across sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. Garanco in particular provides a guarantee product to lenders who are investing in infrastructure. So we're looking to mobilize finance into new infrastructure projects, and we have fully mainstreamed the climate agenda into the way that we look at investing. So when I started my career in renewable energy, green was a sidecar to our mainstream investing opportunities, and today we are thinking about everything we do from a climate perspective.
My name is Ned Rock Menino. I'm the president of Portsmouth Limited Company, a commercial diplomacy firm based in the U.S. serving international development projects, mostly in energy and natural resources. Also a non-resident senior fellow with the Foreign Policy Research Institute, U.S.-based think tank. And I'm a former U.S. senior official serving as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Department of Commerce, leading our global operations among many other initiatives specifically focused on reorienting the U.S. government's approach to emerging markets, primarily Africa.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having us. My name is Noha Shaker. I'm the Secretary General of the Egyptian FinTech Association and the Vice President of the African Union for FinTech Associations, Africa FinTech Network. I'm also an impact investment partner at Gobi Investment Partners, and I lead the digital innovation projects and efforts with FSD Africa, the UKA development arm around the continent. Many hats, they complement each other beautifully. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much, Tony. Hello, my name is Wei Xigong. I'm Chief of Division of Investment Technology Promotion Offices and Institutional Partnerships of United Nations Industrial Development Organization. We headquarter at Vienna, Austria. In my division, there are about 150 people in different locations in Japan, Korea, China, Russia, Bahrain, Germany, Italy, and Nigeria as well, and expanding still continuously. We are focused on investment technology promotion and including climate change related technology, and also the previous two colleagues, Niger and the madam from Africa Development Bank, we are talking similar language, branded finance, bankable project, etc. And particularly, we are focused on building up the relationship with private sectors and the institutional partnerships. We leveraging more powers to work together. I return the floor to Tony.
Thank you very much. So we're just going to run through some questions for the panel, and after that, we pick up some questions from the audience. And I want to direct the first question to you, Michelle, but let me just give you a little bit of context. In fact, I've been having a sort of a back and forth conversation with one of my good friends on LinkedIn, who is actually struggling with this notion of energy transition or just transition. He was asking me, is it just another name for off-grid energy? What does it really mean? In a sense, he really doesn't believe into it, right? So I'd be quite interested to hear from you. What is your definition of just transition when it comes to Africa? At least we can start from there and see how we can progress.
Great, thank you. And again, thanks to the room for being here at the sort of late hour on the second day of the conference. I know you've heard a lot of great content, a lot of facts and figures, but I'll share a few from our side on the just energy transition and why we're so passionate about it. So I think the original term for energy transition really came from this idea of migrating developed economies from their dirty, traditional fossil fuel energy matrix into something cleaner. So that idea of switching over. When we look at the context in Africa where we're investing in energy, it's a distinct one where you're saying at the same time you have the population, as you mentioned already, most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. We have up to 15% of GDP growth that could be wiped out if climate change goes unmitigated by 2030, 100 million people being pushed deeper into poverty. At the same time, the region, again, has contributed the least to greenhouse gas emissions. They haven't caused this climate crisis. And why is that? It's because they don't have access to electricity in the way that the rest of the world does. We have 600 million people who still lack any access to electricity, and others whose access is unreliable, expensive, and limited. So, you know, an American household uses 100 times the amount of electricity as a household in Ethiopia. 78% of the region's businesses cite access to reliable power as an impediment to their business. So that mandate, that imperative to grow access and increase energy consumption is taken in tandem with this mandate to make it cleaner and renewable and more sustainable. So inclusive climate growth to us really is an imperative on the climate change agenda, because that growth will occur. The region is poised to grow. They're set to grow energy consumption by 3 times over the next 20 years. And that, you know, we would like that to be by investing in renewable sources of energy that are sustainable, that keep our climate ambitions on track, but the alternatives will derail the global climate agenda. So a really, to us, urgent, both moral and climate agenda imperative around the just energy transition. And that's why we're sort of focusing our energies on that specifically.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, and I appreciate that. So we're actually already working within a framework, right? Energy transition. So we've had the Paris Agreement that all of you will remember. That was in 2015. I know that it seems like it's been a long time ago, but sometimes the question we're asking ourselves is how much has been done, you know, since we did that. But we're clearly still working toward within this framework. Before that, it was the Kyoto Protocol. Now we have the Paris Agreement. So talking about that, so if we say that we want to, let's say, supercharge the rise of renewable, which was, again, another panel that happened in the room just next door, so it means that we want to have more projects happening. Yeah, that's more on the mitigation side. So the question, when you have projects like that, so I turn towards you, Philip, right? Because Garanco, you're doing a fantastic job, but when you were preparing this panel, you were telling me about having some specific standards that need to be respected for a project to qualify, so that people are not just being accused of being greenwashing the operation. So what is to you, would you say, are the practical step to do to assess projects to make sure they are suitable and they qualify?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it's been an interesting journey. I mean, as I say, my own career has traced the mainstreaming of the climate agenda and working for an organization which, on the back of the Paris climate change talks and the historic agreement there, we had our donors turn around to us and quite rightly say, well, we've just signed up to the Paris Agreement. How are you guys going to implement it through your investment activities? Which has led us to develop a framework to guide our investment activity to make sure that we are not encouraging or locking in investments which are making it impossible for the countries that we're working in to meet their climate change commitments. And it all starts with the NDCs, which you mentioned earlier, Tony, the National Determined Contributions. Now, one of the challenges that we found as an investor when navigating this landscape is you have the NDC that's presented, you can download it off the internet, but it doesn't necessarily tell you whether this particular project is part of the plan, whether it fits into the carbon budget of that particular country. So then you go, okay, well, I'll turn and I'll have a look at what the finance ministry is saying. There's probably a document from the finance ministry and how they're going to do it. And then you might look at, there might be another paper that a consultant has written on how the renewable energy industry or energy efficiency sector should be transforming, and it doesn't match. And then you've got something else from a different department. And so this is the picture that we've found frequently in many of the markets that we're trying to work in, where it's not immediately obvious and easy to interpret whether a project is aligned with that country's NDC. There's also the question around technology. Okay, so you've got certain sectors where we don't have a solution at the moment. Cement, steel, industries like this. You know, we are an infrastructure investor. At the moment, there isn't a particularly green way to make cement or steel, but we cannot ignore those sectors if we want to be investing in infrastructure. So there is a technical question around the technology that you're supporting and how that can be future-proofed to allow for clean hydrogen or whatever it might be. And all of these things need to be looked in detail. So what do we need to do as an investor community? I think the key is for us to be working together, and this is something that Garanco through the PIDGE is doing with a lot of our other DFI partners, and we're talking to each other about the sort of frameworks that we're using to, and decision trees, I suppose, to decide whether, you know, this gas project, for example, should be considered aligned with a country's Paris commitments, so that we as an investing community are not sending confusing signals to the market. I think that's something really, really important that we can do. And I think that dialogue needs to continue. That needs to be constant as the science is evolving, the technologies are evolving, and the needs of each individual country will change over time as well. And so we need to be, as an investing community, we need to be very coordinated, and we need to support the countries that we're working in navigate this confusing and new landscape for everyone.
Excellent, thank you very much. So I'm going to do something slightly different that I didn't plan. So I'm just going to get a question to Noah, and after that, I'll take a couple of questions before we can get the other speaker to intervene. So just want to turn to you, right, because I want to talk about something very important, right, because we are here at Investment Summit, put it that way. And I want to ask you a question that actually tap into the two main stakeholders, the African entrepreneur, but also the investors. So to the investors, what I want to ask you, because you represent the Egyptian FinTech Association, also you're part of the Africa FinTech Network, right? So very important. You want to make sure that you speak to her. So to the investor, why would you say that Africa, it's an excellent destination for investment? And to the Africans entrepreneur, what can they do to better promote themselves? Because one of the things actually people don't know, one of the reasons as well there's no more investment into Africa, we're not also great at marketing ourselves. So how can we resolve that and fix that?
Well, I'm not the greatest when it comes to marketing as well. So in order to keep things in perspective, I'll happily share why we are an attractive market for investment, but also what needs to be done on the ground to make sure that we are attractive for climate investment in particular. You have shared some numbers. Thank you for putting things in perspective. We need $250 billion a year to meet our NDCs that we have committed to as a continent. In the year 2020, we have managed to mobilize 30 of those, out of which only 14% came from the private sector. And knowing how scarce is public capital in the continent out of government budgets, there is a lot of work that needs to be done on the ground as far as regulatory reforms are needed, as far as policy reforms are needed to make sure that we encourage that flow from the private sector towards greener projects. So in order to have that energy transition, the easiest thing to start with is to stop subsidizing fossil fuels. That's a policy decision that needs to be there. In order to grow that off-grid electricity structure, you have to have a law in place that enables people to generate and sell electricity, and you have to also have in place the proper structure to make sure that they are later on integratable into the system that is in place, which is a challenge. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done in there. Why should we be an attractive investment opportunity? Because in a couple of years' time, we are going to host 25% of world population. We are on a growth trajectory, and that growth can either be clean when we manage the transition, or it can continue to be business as usual, and this is when, by the year 2050, we can be a second China. Right now, they say that Africa is amongst the least polluters, yes, but if you add agriculture and its subsectors, we are as polluting as Europe at the moment. Where we go forward, that's a decision of Africans, the governments, and definitely is a decision of international investors. DFI's money that we should be using to crowd in private investment into the continent and not crowd private investment that is there. We should use blended finance to facilitate that flow of private investment into the sector in general. The market is huge. That makes us a huge investment opportunity. The youth percentage is more than 50% of the population in average. If you look at sectors like clean and renewable energy, we do not lack in resources. So all of those are factors that are there that can make us a huge investment opportunity. We, however, need to do the work that is done. We need support with the capacity building of the sectors. This is new to all of us, and regardless how hard we try to educate ourselves and acquire the know-how, there are other organizations who have dedicated teams to actually do that. They should be offering help and support as well. I hope that has answered your question.
No, definitely, definitely. To be honest, we can spend a day to actually answer this question. Is there any burning question from the audience? Otherwise, I'm just going to carry on. Yeah, I'm just going to take one, maximum two, and we can, either you project or we can give you a mic. But if you can, you in front, you can project, yeah. I'm sure you can.
A long day. Yeah, I don't know if this has been talked about yet, but I mean, I know COP27 is happening this year in Egypt, and normally a lot of the discussions, especially today, has been on ESG and those type of things. On the EES, we are talking about the climate side of things, right? But for my company, where we have so many people trying to invest in, giving investment to so many entrepreneurs and all of that, especially even in agriculture, sometimes we struggle to almost advise them or guide them to not be harming the environment in terms of doing their businesses, cutting down trees, burning of bushes, and things like that. So my question is, do you see the aspect of poverty and them not being as literate in terms of the environment and climate? Do you see it as something that also Africans or governments or even the school system even has to build that capacity, as you said, in all the population, especially the young population that are going into this farming, agriculture, and businesses, you know? Because if they don't really know what ESG means or how their businesses, their startups can affect the environment, then there is a mismatch, you know? So to what extent do you see that gap in terms of closing the climate challenges that you're talking about?
I thought you were going to join us. So who want to take the question, right? So you can do it. Okay. After that, I'm just going to go to Ned and carry on the questions.
Okay. Well, I mean, I can take half an hour to answer that question from all angles and perspectives, to be honest. There is definitely market development that needs to happen and take place as far as climate-related investments, technologies, businesses, and the like. But let us be real and practical on the ground. Emerging economies and mature markets, they have totally different nature. How they operate on the ground is completely, utterly different. So you cannot expect people to prioritize the climate when they need to cut a tree to get power, heat, in order not to freeze or cook their food or the like. What you need to do is to educate them and offer them alternatives to that. And then you put together the measures in place that says you should not be doing this, to discourage what they're doing or to incentivize the transition, which is even more applicable as far as emerging markets is concerned. Yeah. So there are but definitely, yes, there is an element of capacity building education, policy and regulatory reform, driving investments, again, to offer the alternatives in there. I'm sure if they're aware and they have the alternative and the right policies in place to either discourage them or incentivize them to do the transition, they're going to do it. I mean, again, we're not reinventing the wheel. It has happened before in other markets. I mean, you can take an example of Germany. The first thing the government did in order to encourage the use of clean solar energy was to actually subsidize the solar panels prior to having the carbon pricing and what we call cap and control policies in place that enforces certain limits on carbon emissions and the like. They incentivized the people. So the answer is very simple. Of course, how simple it is does not mean it's easy to implement on the ground. It has to be a very comprehensive framework that is there, but definitely is feasible. Thank you.
That's a brilliant answer. In fact, I don't know, Ned, if you want to respond to that, but let me ask you as well a question, which I believe actually fits very well. Because we said, or I said, at the beginning, about 90% of the funding is missing, right? So if you look at the 2.8 trillion that we're talking about, I know that the 300 million is just what people pledging. It doesn't mean they're even here. In fact, they're not there for sure. So the question to you, if that 90% should come, part of it would be foreign investment. Let's be honest about that, right? So I'm sure you're talking a lot, you're dealing with the international community, so international projects, through your experience, extensive experience. What would you say are the international standard or specific standards that you would like to see happen in order to attract those funding? And the way it's related to your question is because ESG is an important source of funding. That's maybe how you actually need to approach that with these people, saying that if you want the money, that's the language of the money, and that's what money would follow, right? But I want Ned actually to talk you through the different standards that needs to happen to make it an attractive destination for funding. So Ned, you want to see? Yeah.
No, I love that question. That standards question is actually part of what we talked about yesterday around attracting institutional investors to Africa. And I will note that there are really two numbers that drive much of my perspective and how I would approach kind of the broader Africa energy conversation. And the first is 54, and I think we know we're going to go with that. And the second is 400 million. So the 54, let me start. When we talk about Africa and marketing Africa, just to jump as an aside, we wouldn't talk about Europe as 30-odd countries, but we talk about Africa as 30-odd, or 54. Africa is kind of one destination. I think we should be very mindful that when we're looking at African markets, especially sub-Saharan Africa markets, they have their own distinct opportunities, their own challenges, and their own standards to attract individual investment. So we looked at some of the nuances between some of the countries yesterday, and admittedly, you have an entire spectrum of investment destinations, and the portfolios are so different that you might find an electrification rate of 78 or 9%, and someone can fact check me on that, in Kenya, and a rate of 11 or 12% in South Sudan. The approaches to those two countries are going to be really different in how they attract inbound investment, what type of investors they're attracting, the types of projects they're looking for. So the standards piece is incredibly important. The environmental standards is key, as well as the labor and the health and safety standards. What I would personally recommend seeing, and if there's anyone from a country in this room, a country representative, feel free to throw your hand up and we can get really in the weeds. But I think the place I would start is take a look at the life cycle emissions of the projects you are seeking and ensure that your standards reflect an ultimate goal of zero emissions or the lowest possible emissions on that entire life cycle. And so what I mean is if you are trying to cite a renewable energy project, but you are leaning on DFIs DFIs to write your tenders, or your government's writing the tender for the project, the procurement, and that procurement doesn't single out source of origin standards or manufacturing standards or how the components within the supply chain are sourced, you are leaving your country open to some serious gaps and some real environmental hazards. And I mean, I don't want to, I'll let you all use your imagination for the country I may or may not be alluding to, but you have a scenario where you might write a tender for, a wind project or a solar project or something of that sort and feel great about the zero emissions, but that project itself is being created, the manufacture project itself is being done with thermal coal in a lightly regulated power gen facility. The manufacturing is done with maybe the lowest labor standards, the lowest health and safety standards, the lowest environmental standards. The minerals within a solar panel might be mined, maybe not, again, to the highest standards that are out there. And that life cycle emissions cost, the life cycle emissions effect, is so great by the time it actually reaches your project. You've already passed your global goal. And then to go bring it back to your anecdote at the beginning of this panel discussion, I mean, what happens in the kind of the small scale, those incidents, we are all within those things don't happen in a vacuum. It's all interconnected. So you might be able to reduce the emissions in one move, but at the same time open yourself up to some greater environmental harm without even realizing it. So having high standards in your tenures and your procurements, leaning on your government to do that, that is a great first step to attract some of the inbound investment from maybe some of the West, some of the US for sure. I mean, the standards bar is pretty high for some of those larger investments. And I'm talking the kind of the generational change investments. That's an area where I think there should be considerably more attention going into some of these conversations to really dig in and encourage. And for investors, I mean, the investors in this room, your money is your voice in that process. If you want to see higher standards before you invest in a company, demand it. Demand to know where your products are being sourced from the companies you are investing in. That's key. Otherwise, you're missing something. You might be missing something that really doesn't tell the entire story. The other number is 400 million. 400 million, roughly, population of Europe. Also happens to be the rough estimate from the World Bank as to the folks who have no energy access, power access across the entire continent of Africa. So as we talk about energy transition, we're starting from scratch in so much of the continent. It's less about transition and more about addition. And we talk about getting some of these projects online, making these smart investments. We have to understand that some of the folks the populations we're trying to serve, their ability to afford power is at a much lower threshold than sometimes we see advertised from the multilateral institutions, from the DFIs, et cetera. And that's a disconnect that has to be fixed. That can be fixed in their procurements. It can be fixed with better awareness and better due diligence. I think I recently saw, maybe it was World Bank, an estimate that that 400 million block, the average kilowatt hour cost should be between 7.5 and 9 cents for them to be able to afford it. Now, I don't know what types of projects we're looking at, but you think of that kilowatt hour cost, if your renewable energy project isn't meeting a cost that can be afforded by the people who need it most, you're not going to reach baseload. You're not going to maintain baseload, at least those subsidies, which isn't the way to live. And the project may not prove bankable in the end. And we've seen that play out in a couple different states across the continent, most recently in Kenya, where a moratorium, I believe, is in the process of being lifted after 19 months on projects. Those are the types of things to watch for. So, in considerations going forward, it's 54 markets, each with their own set of standards, each with the ability to set their own standards, and you see that across the entire continent. You have, I'll point to Ghana, for example, with very high standards, health standards, very high labor standards comparatively to the rest of the continent. Uganda is another one, Rwanda, and they've been able to really carve out for themselves a reputation as a better place to do business. They will have a much easier time attracting larger investors, institutional investors, et cetera. And the other piece is that 400 million, because whatever project you're citing on the continent, if that 400 million isn't served, then it's less about transit. We're missing kind of the big piece of it. And that's the humanitarian perspective, because we're trying to bring power to everybody, I should hope.
Exactly. Thank you very much for that. I'll come back to you in a minute. I just want to make sure that we actually can have a contribution. And I think we have about 10 minutes left. And what I would like to do is to get a question for you, Weiji, maybe squeeze in a couple of questions from the panel. By the way, prepare your question. Make sure that they are short and concise, please, right? Otherwise, I won't take it. So, Weiji, come back to you. So we're talking about investment. We know that we need both a contribution from the public sector and the private sector. So Noah mentioned about the blended finance. That's one option, but there are many other options. From your case, from UNIDO, I know when we talked previously, you talked about platform? Are we ways that you encouraging it? I just want you to share that with the audience, so that'd be much appreciated, please.
Thank you very much, Tony. In fact, this afternoon I have been enjoying the lectures and talkers from different speakers. They have talked about innovative financing, branded financing, public-private partnership, etc. in this way, another way. And also we are talking about now climate change investment. Now you talk about kilowatt cost, etc. from country to country difference. And now I do not want to repeat the speakers have already talked about. I want to step into what is the other reasons to make these things different. So why do we talk about today? We talk about investment in Africa. And my experience in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, and in other countries showing that the investment principle the same. There's no difference to say it is the investment in Africa different from investment in Asia or in America, all the same. As in the previous session, the lady said, we are focused on the business. We are focused on the money. We focus on how to make the project sustainable. We focus on how to make the return investment be available for investors so that they are motivated to do the job, right? Then what is the difference? We are talking about Africa. What is the difference? Africa and other countries, other continents. There's 3-point difference. I want to emphasize here because I want to lead to another topic I'll step into further. One, the enabling environment of investments difference. The intensity of demand difference. The availability of a skill level and policy as all difference. If you focus on the 3 points, all friends from Africa, I have been in West, South, East, North Africa, many 30 countries. So if you are focused on these 3 points I mentioned here, you make your own money in Africa. You make your own money. Then we are talking about investment in Africa. If you imagine investors from America go to Africa and they put money there and money never come back to his pocket, he will not go. He will not go. Number one. Number two, today we have the government A, tomorrow we have government B in the same country. Then policy changed. Today we go to there to make money, and tomorrow we go to, and then money got lost. Then they don't go. So enabling environments, policy framework, and at large, the people, the skill level availability. The people should understand you financially, legally, consensus building. There, then you talk the same language. Then you make money. The investment pull in because you have high demand. Now, United Nations, we are, as a government, intergovernmental organization, a non-profit making government UN system, we do not make money, but we see the key point, the pain on the neck. The pain on the neck. How can we attract more investors go to Africa? Then we summarized that we can help you in provide institutional capacity building from government aspect, legal aspect, financial aspect, and try to tell you, help you to make the policy not change from day 1 to day 2 and from this year to next year, because investment has its return, period of return. This year, they put the money there, tomorrow, they never come back, then they will not put the money there. And also, at large, when I was in Uganda, for example, we are focused on the skill level availability enhancement. Together with UNESCO, for example, we include even the investment package, the knowledge in the, as a vocational training part, as elements in the high school, so that everyone learn this is the fundamental aspect. So this is what we are doing beyond We'll talk about blended financing mechanism. Of course, as the Africa Investment Bank colleague, the lady, I forgot her name, she will talk about innovative financing and blended financing, concrete examples. Excellent. She was talking excellent. The question I was asked her after the session, which tool have you been using to assess where's the boundary to which part is public money, which part is private money? Public money says, I don't have much money to put in, because I have not so much money. This is the money collected from taxpayers. And private money says, how much I put, I want to return. So where's the boundary? Okay, then we have the tool. We have a tool, the tool has been utilized for 40 years. We create how much money should be from the public, how much money from private, and what is the overall partnership, what are beneficial points and return on investment. So we have the mechanism, we have the capacity building mechanisms, we have the training, and we training without requesting your payments. Okay, thank you.
Excellent. So thank you very much. That was actually great. So I'm just going to take one question, but it has to be very short, a quick question, because after we need to wrap up.
One quick comment,
Okay.
but it's really critical. The fourth input, an element of success in there, is the depth of the financial markets, the financial industry. The financial industry is the vehicle that can help mobilize private finance, is the vehicle that can help de-risk the country and currency risk. So not focusing on deepening the financial industry, building the capacity of the financial institutions means we are never going to be able to meet our targets and objectives there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And by the way, I like a question where obviously Michelle or Philip can address. Is that one last question? Otherwise, we just, okay, that's on, yeah.
Hi, my name's Bleming Adeni Williams. I'm with Infrica Africa. I'm not sure if this question is specifically for Michelle, but just to the panel in general. I'm quite interested in where the role you think gas plays in the just transition, especially given a lot of the European governments still vilify gas.
Great question. I think that will be the only question we can take. So Michelle, because you talked about the just transition.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I don't know that we have a clear answer from the Kawisafi perspective. We're really investing in distributed renewables, so we're not at the project scale where we're really assessing the generation matrix on a country basis. So that's clearly one where the optimal balance between renewable and other sources is really a generation matrix level question to optimize. And I don't think we have, it's really not, it's unprecedented, I would say, to have a system that's 100% renewables. So we do all have to keep in mind that running a more intensely renewable system is achievable and possible, but in terms of technical constraints, those still remain. So I do think kind of having a balanced approach to that is really important. What I would say is, the opportunities that we see in our sector in distributed renewables are extraordinary. So in terms of just kind of building on the commentary from the panel, our team's based in Nairobi, Kenya. We have the strongest investment pipeline that we've seen since we began investing in 2016 in terms of the ability of distributed renewables to build that energy access, to do it renewably, to do it affordably, to do it really effectively and either complement or displace other forms of energy. So I guess I would just note on, try to end on a positive note as well to say we have many challenges, but I think there are really exciting solutions out there and something that, we're continuing to work on.
30 seconds. So I will add on that just transition. I think it depends on your definition of just. And if just is opening up energy to then lead to the correlation in greater healthcare and greater education, less conflict and violence, better economics, and just general prosperity, then transitioning into a just space might mean bring power faster and at a more affordable rate than on the long-term scale. And that's a balancing act. I don't have the answer for that. I think every country, unique countries, unique profiles, unique opportunities. It's up to the investors to make the decisions and help guide the best best and most immediate solutions to serve those populations who presently have no service and are facing some of the worst humanitarian challenges across the continent, around the world. So keep that in mind going forward. I think that's the, if I could leave with one thing, it's consider your role and the real impact value your roles have to advance not just a transition of energy, but rather moving entire populations, entire communities from one scenario into a space of real prosperity. That happens with both renewables and with gas, and we didn't mention geothermal or hydro at all, but there are so many innovations all across the entire energy spectrum right now. There isn't a wrong solution. There isn't a wrong solution. It's rather which solution best fits the profile you're engaging.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just having Philip to wrap up, and I think that's...
Okay, yeah. So a very quick one, just on the point on gas. I mean, the gas is challenging because when you need to finance it on a long-term basis, right? So you're looking at 25, 30-year PPAs. If we're trying to reach net zero across the globe in 2050 as per the Paris climate change, then we'll run out of time, right? And that is the genuine problem that we find at Garanco when we're looking at gas projects today, right? Because the economics require that long term and we don't have the long term. So this is where I bring back to what I was saying earlier about working together, working with the scientists, working with the engineers to look at technological solutions on how to future-proof, because gas does have to be part of the transition, not just in power generation, but in transport as well. But we need to be approaching this intelligently to make sure that these technologies can be converted and we do have a pathway that allows them to be carbon neutral by the sort of 2050 horizon that we're looking at. And if we can do that, then you'll see the funds flowing from the international investors and the governments that are providing institutions like the Pitch and Garanco with their money. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that, and I appreciate for your time. Thank you very much, guys.